Hey folks, Eddie from Totally Wired Guitars here, and today we're going to be taking a look at this Fender Japan FSR Traditional 2 60s Jaguar in beautiful and very limited edition Sherwood green. That was a heck of a mouthful, but I am super excited to be exploring this amazing Jaguar with you all today. This was a factory special run. They did only 2 runs of this back in 2024. Each run, I believe, had about 25 of these produced for all of Japan, so 50 total. Super limited run. My goodness, this thing is a beauty. Some standout features on this as compared to their typical traditional 60s Jaguar models is that these ones actually have alder bodies as opposed to basswood. These also do have a 7 1/4 radius bound neck with a dark rosewood fretboard. They also have medium jumbo frets, which is not very common for most of those traditional 60s. I believe they come with either vintage frets or narrow tall frets. So the medium jumbos on this are very unique and feel fantastic on this neck. They have a 40mm nut width, which is either a deal breaker or an awesome feature depending on your own personal preferences. It's a little bit slimmer than the standard 1 5/8 inch, which is vintage accurate for the 60s. Definitely a bit narrower than the 1.65 inch nut width found on the American vintage reissues, the AV65, the American original. So now moving on to the hardware, these came stock with the Fender Japan tremolo unit. They have gotten way better over the years and not necessarily need to be upgraded, but this one here has been upgraded with an American vintage reissue unit. These also came standard with a Mustang bridge, a 65 reissue style Mustang bridge with the 56mm string spacing. That is very different from the threaded saddle original bridge found on typical traditional 60s Jags. Now, because of that 56mm string spacing, some people found it problematic because the outer E strings, both your low E and your high E, came a little too close for comfort to the edges of the fretboard. If you didn't take the time to actually reseat the neck, your fingers might end up slipping off and not being able to fret cleanly when you hit the upper registers. So I ended up upgrading the bridge on this to one of the Stay Trem licensed American Pro 7 1/4 radius bridges, the same bridges found on the Johnny Marr Jaguar, as well as the Troy Van Leeuwen Jazzmaster. They are super high quality, licensed by Stay Trem, and share a lot of the outstanding features of the Stay Trem bridge, such as the little nylon sleeve that prevents the height adjustment grubs from lowering themselves over time, as well as, yes, that 52mm string spacing, which keeps those outer E strings away from the edge of the fretboard. Now, these came in 2 variants over the course of those 2 special runs. Some of them came with US pure vintage 65 pickups installed. This one came with just the vintage style Jaguar pickups made by Fender Japan. And I've got to say that for stock pickups, these sound amazing. I'm not going to lie, I like them better than the pure vintage 65 pickups. I feel like they have a bit more character to them, a little bit more airiness, and I feel like they are less wax potted than the pure vintage 65. So they have a bit more clarity and top end sparkle to them that you kind of lose, you know, on some more heavily potted Jaguar style pickups. And yeah, I think they just have a lot of character to them, which I appreciate. I feel like they really have knocked it out of the ballpark with some of the stock pickups that they've been putting in their offsets over the past couple of years, such as those that came in the Heritage 60s Jazzmaster, which are seriously some of my, not just for stock pickups, but some of my favorite Jazzmaster pickups that I've ever heard. Now, for our switching configurations, we've got the traditional Jaguar configuration with your independent pickup selector switches, as well as the strangle or bass cut switch. You've got your volume knob and your tone knob, as well as the rhythm circuit, which is all wired to vintage specs with high quality electronics such as CTS pots in your main volume and tone control, switchcraft switches throughout, as well as US spec or imperial size mini pots and roller knobs and mounting bracket. So if you want to swap out the Korean-made Chinsung mini pots that are in here, that's the only thing that is not the same as AVRI specs here. You can easily swap in CTS mini pots with no modification. That said, these do not lack in quality at all. And in case you are under the impression that CTS pots are made in the USA, I hate to tell you that they're not. I believe that they're actually made in Taiwan. So there is no real difference to the quality between the mini pots in the rhythm circuit here and those found on an American vintage reissue. Now, these came out in a number of different colors. We have the Sherwood green, obviously, here with the matching headstock. They also came in Sonic Blue, like I had mentioned before. Inca Silver. I don't remember if they came in Dakota Red or that's just the traditional 60s model. But yeah, they did a number of runs of these special Kinko Music exclusive colors, and they are just absolutely gorgeous. Moving on to the neck, we've got a pale tinted maple neck on this one. It's got a medium to full C profile with very little taper moving up the neck. Fender Japan calls this a U-neck, and some people absolutely love them, and some people hate them. They prefer a slimmer neck, but that U-neck designation is not at all like what you would find on like a vintage Telecaster or Nocaster, and by no means is it a baseball bat. It does remind me quite a bit of the AV65 neck, only with a narrower nut width. Now, these ones also came with vintage style tuners, but starting a number of years ago, I believe it must have been maybe 2018, maybe a little bit later than that, but for some reason, Fender Japan decided to stop using Goto tuners on most of their offset guitars. And I'm not sure why that is. The only exception to that I have found has been the Heritage 60s Jazzmaster. This one comes with some, I'm not sure if they are just domestically produced tuners that do not have the Japan stamp on the inner casing, but they do feel just a tad bit cheaper. They function just fine. I'd say they are comparable probably to Ping tuners, which I've also seen installed stock on the Bound & Blocks FSR traditional 60s Jazzmaster. But if you want to swap out these tuners for Goto SD91s, for example, you are going to have to remove the bushings, as these bushings are too small for those Gotos to just drop in. A few other details: the body is completely shielded with black shielding paint. It does a pretty decent job at blocking out noise. The bottom of the pickguard is also shielded with an adhesive like aluminum sheet. So as far as noise goes, this thing is not all that noisy, especially for being true single coils. One last thing of note regarding the specs here is that starting back in about 2018 or so, Fender Japan linked up with Mark Hendrick, one of the master builders from the custom shop, who oversaw the transition to Fender Japan using the same profiling data for their pick guards and their plates and their plastics. So if you're looking to swap out the pick guard or any of the plates, they are basically the same exact cut as those found on the various American reissue models. Now, whether it was the stock bridge or this American Pro 7 1/4 radius Staytrem license bridge, I am getting, with a good setup, about 2.5 to 2.75 millimeters of height away from the pick guard, which is what I personally love. And you do not need to shim the necks on these things to achieve that kind of height. They already come with an angled neck pocket. Definitely not as pronounced, I'd say, as the neck pockets on, say, the American original 60s models that I have seen. So that is one thing that you should take note of if you get one of these. Don't go popping in an extra 1 degree shim, because your bridge is going to be sitting at like 9 or 10 millimeters high, and that is way too much. That is going to introduce a world of trouble with regards to tuning stability, just too tight of a string tension. So yeah, skip the shim on this one. So moving on to my experiences playing Jaguars from this particular series with the bound necks and the 7 1/4 radius and medium jumbo frets. I'll just say this: I had reservations about the medium jumbo fret. It's not my favorite fret size, as you probably have heard in other videos that I've done. Vintage size frets are home court for me. I like feeling that closer connection to the fretboard when I'm doing chords or even little lead licks and things like that. But after actually playing this thing, those reservations went right out the window. This thing came with perfectly leveled frets out of the box. Kinko Music didn't do any sort of, fret work before sending it to me. They feel really good. I was still able to get insanely low action on this thing. The truss rod adjustment I did during the setup led to almost a perfectly straight neck with just a very, very slight bit of relief. When I measure the relief the Fender way, where you put the capo on the first fret and depress the last fret and check the distance between the top of the 8th fret and the bottom of your low E and also high E strings, I was getting about 20 thousandths, a little less than 20 thousandths of an inch on the low E, and right about 10 thousandths of an inch on the high E string. So that is super low action. I am not getting any sort of buzzes on this thing whatsoever. The action is really, really low, really comfortable, really nice, and you don't have to press quite as hard. You can apply a bit more of a gentle and nuanced, chording technique on this guitar, as opposed to kind of the death grip that I sometimes put, admittedly, when I'm playing my Jaguars that have vintage frets. You can approach your chording and your little riffs and licks on this with a bit of a lighter touch because of the medium jumbo frets. A nice little surprise. So touching on what I had mentioned previously about the nut width, this narrower 40 millimeter nut width being a deal breaker for some folks, I actually got some information from Kaz because prior to this, Fender Japan had been doing 1 5/8 inch or 1.65 inch nut widths on their Fender Jaguars and Jazzmasters, but for some reason on the Jaguar for the past few years, Fender Japan have been doing this 40 millimeter nut width, and the reason for that is that most folks who play Fender Jaguars in Japan apparently are women. There are a number of, I guess, celebrity musicians or very well-known guitarists out in Japan who are female that play the Jaguar. And because women's hands tend to be smaller than men's, having that narrower nut width here helps them to more easily play this type of guitar. Now, I found that pretty curious, and I myself, in comparing back to back with my Johnny Marr or an AV65 Jaguar, you can definitely notice the narrow nut width here. It's most pronounced, I think, when you're doing open chords closer to the nut, but I don't really think that it's a deal breaker. I think it's something that you have to try. I had a friend and client recently buy my Sonic Blue one, and he's a bass player, and he's played both jazz basses, P basses, and he said that this neck just felt like home to him. And that's someone who's used to primarily playing much bigger necks. I think it's a thing where if on the rare occasion you find one of these in a shop near you or a friend has one, it's definitely worth trying out first before you think that this narrower nut is going to be a deal breaker for you, because I think that it's actually offset by that Fender Japan U shape. The fact that this has a bit more significant shoulder than previous Fender Japan Jaguars kind of, I don't know, almost cancels out that narrower nut width, at least for me. It makes for just a very, very comfortable playing experience. I do find that chunkier necks, for whatever reason, force me to play with better and more nuanced technique than super slim necks. And so, yeah, for me, this neck is perfect. And if they did release a 1.65 inch nut width version or 1 5/8 inch nut width version in the future, I would definitely be open to it and welcome it, and I think those would be awesome. But as it stands, this neck is friggin' phenomenal. One other thing of note is that a number of these that Kinko Music put out were actually under 8 pounds, which is quite the feat for an actual alder-bodied Jaguar. If you know Jaguars, you know that they are usually 8.5 pounds and up, some of them even over 9 pounds. This one here weighed about 7.5 to 7.6 pounds on my bathroom scale. After the AVRI tremolo upgrade, as well as the Johnny Marr bridge upgrade, it's now sitting at about 7.75 pounds, but still really, really light for a Jaguar. And seriously, kudos to Fender Japan, because that is quite the feat and not something that you commonly see. If that wasn't enough of a shining recommendation for you, let's go ahead and answer the question point blank. Is this guitar worth it? And the answer to that is absolutely yes. I would give this thing 10 out of 5 stars if I could. I think everything about this guitar, from the fit and finish to the fretwork to this very unique combination of specs that you're just not going to find even if Fender did another American Vintage reissue. You're not going to find something with this slimmer nut width. You're not going to find something with this same neck profile. You really would probably have to either commission an independent builder or the custom shop to build something like this for you, because it's just phenomenal. The only thing I would say that actually needs to be upgraded if you're having trouble with it is that 56 millimeter string spacing bridge, but you can always find a 52 millimeter spacing one. Nova Custom Guitars, for example, who I often recommend as the best budget 52 millimeter string spacing bridges, sells them for like 40, 45 bucks. They just released a raw brass saddle version, which I think is like 45 or 50 bucks. And that solves any real issue that you might have with this. Yes, we did upgrade by request here the American Vintage reissue tremolo, but the stock unit, as I said before, the stock Japanese tremolos have been getting better and better over the years. I just think that they're using more robust springs. They're just like a lot more fluid, a lot more responsive. So even that is not something that's absolutely mandatory to change. And all the electronics and the pickups and all of the stuff that comes stock on this thing is just great. The only other thing on the wish list is that maybe if they could make the pickups with and wiring of this with cloth covered leads, just to make the ease of maintenance and modding a little bit easier. And maybe if they had you know, the brass shielding plates instead of shielding paint, that would do a little bit better of a job at shielding out noise. But aside from that, I'd say pound for pound, this thing is up there, if not better than most of the American Fenders, definitely the made in Mexico Fenders. And this is just like in a whole nother universe as compared to the Squire ones. If you find one of these for less than 2,000 bucks in good condition, in a color that you like, I would say spring on it, because once these have finally left the hands of, you know, like scalper shops, for example, I don't think that you're going to see very many folks putting these back out on the market, as these are definitely keeper kind of guitars. Anyway, I think that about wraps it up for this video. I hope you enjoyed it and found it informative, especially if you've been on the hunt for the perfect Fender Jaguar for you. If you haven't already, please do like and subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell to be notified of new videos as they drop. It helps this teeny tiny channel to grow. And as always, don't forget to follow Totally Wired Guitars for more offset guitars buying tips.